Hi there, welcome back to Books for Thought. We've got a really exciting episode for you. We have Professor Lorna Hughes from the University of Glasgow joining us so she can talk to us about her department, which is the Department of Information Studies, and a little bit more concretely, one of the UG options that she teaches on, which would be Digital Media and Information Studies. This is a degree that really excites me. I love to read, I love to investigate, I love to see how these particular activities can be useful and connect to nearly everything else and really bring people together. And I know that Lorna is also excited about these things as well. So Lorna, if you could give us a bit of a background about you, your journey toward your own university studies, as well as, you know, what is it like to be at the University of Glasgow, to be as a student within this department? That would be great.
Thanks, Allison. It's really a pleasure to be here and to talk to you today about one of my favorite topics, which is books, and especially books that I love and that relate to my line of research and my line of interest as well. So I'm Lorna Hughes. I'm Professor of Digital Humanities at the University of Glasgow. I'm based in the Information Studies subject area, which is in our College of Arts. I've been at Glasgow since, searches my memory, since about 2015. Before that, I was at King's College London, and before that, I was at the University of Wales, and before that, I worked at New York University and Arizona State University. My field is digital humanities, which very broadly defined is using new technologies to get closer to and enable better analysis and understanding of humanities sources. So using computational methodologies for text mining, digitization, and linking and sharing collections across institutions, across organizations, and across object type. So I work with text, image, multimedia, moving image. I'm especially interested in digital heritage that has been created by communities that relates to local histories and the histories of people who perhaps don't always make it into the history books. And I think that digital media is a really good way to share and understand those stories. But of course, it raises some challenges, and that's my current research. The information studies subject area at Glasgow has an undergraduate program called Digital Media and Information Studies. And like all the Glasgow undergraduate degrees, it can be done as single honours or joint honours. But if it's chosen as a single honours degree, the graduates become qualified information professionals, and our program is accredited by SILUP, the Library and Information Professional Association. So the theme of our subject area is very much creating, managing and using information in a digital age. Where does information come from? How is it created? How is it stored? How is it shared? And how is the digital changing the way that we do those things? And how is the digital changing our relationship with information? And how is practice of managing information changing to reflect the necessities and also the challenges of digital media and digital information? We also have a couple
Lorna, just to jump in for a second, this sounds like this is a degree that's going to be really useful or interesting for people who are interested in the technologies, interested in digital skills, but also have a love of gathering information, a love of reading, a love of maybe culture and how you can link the two together, no?
Yes, exactly. Our students tend to be people who are interested in both technology and humanities. Some more so than others, but the program is a good opportunity to bridge those interests. But we really get to grips with teaching the students about creating digital media, creating websites, creating digital libraries, digital collections, as well as understanding the nature of humanities information and sources. So the students spend a lot of time in libraries, archives, museums. We have very, very good connections with the what we call memory institutions, libraries, archives, museums, and galleries in and around Glasgow, and indeed internationally. So students have lots of opportunities to work practically with information institutions. But yes, it's a subject where our students tend to be interested in both humanities, data and information, but also the digital media side of things. So yes, it's very much.
I think some of your research actually could be a great example of that. And that is in the blog for anyone who is interested. I've included links to all of Lorna's current research where we could see how exactly she is using all of her knowledge and skills connected to the media, digitalization, etc., to bring about a useful collection in terms of culture in the UK. And thinking again about putting things into practice, Lorna, and thinking about what you chose for book one, which is Richard Ovenden's Burning the Books. He is also very focused on modern day as well as the past, and in looking at how digitalization is actually a very important thing, thinking about our collections in terms of culture and literature, etc. So could you comment a little bit on why you've brought this book to us this month, and what you think is interesting about it for someone especially thinking about your courses?
Here we are, book one, Burning the Books, which hopefully you can see. I splashed out for the hardback edition, but it is also available in paperback. It's Richard Ovenden, who is currently Bodley's librarian at the University of Oxford. And this is a really fascinating book. I love it. I mentioned on the blog another book, which I also have here, Dust by Caroline Stegman, which is very much a philosophy of why we archive, why we use libraries, that it's about memory and it's about engaging with the past and understanding the way that the past has been constructed and the way that the past is documented. The Stegman book is very much a philosophical approach to that. It talks about archives and the construction of memory. But the Ovenden book, The Burning the Books, is very much bookends that in a really nice way because it's written by a practitioner. Richard is an active librarian. He is working in this field. He is grappling with the issues of managing information and managing digital information. He has a connection with Glasgow in that he was the chair of the Digital Preservation Coalition, which is based in my department at Glasgow. So we see him around from time to time. But he's really bringing the practice of understanding how a library is constructed, how it's created, and how an archive tells a story. And it's very much about the absences and the silences in archives, which are just as important as the material that is present in the archive. So he talks a lot about why libraries matter. He talks about the destruction of libraries and the destruction of information. I mean, as you can tell from the title, he talks about a lot of the famous libraries and archives that have been destroyed throughout the years, from the Library of Alexandria to the archives of Sarajevo. And he talks about how we tackle managing information that is missing and how we construct narratives of the past when the past has been destroyed in the form of its archive. But he also talks about archiving and understanding the present. And of course, you know, we're talking on Zoom This is a digital conversation. We're using digital media. You've used digital media for the blog. That is a digital publication. It will probably be captured for the web archive at some point. But there is a question about longevity of digital information, which is quite serious and quite significant. And we lose digital information, like the emails, correspondence, blogs, publications, personal materials, just by attrition. But we're also seeing a loss of public information, public records, through deletions. We saw this, and Richard talks about this in the book, in the Trump administration deleting tweets, which is in breach of the Presidential Records Act. And we see emails and WhatsApp discussion groups by the British government, which have been deleted. So we're losing government records on a daily basis at this time. So we have this historical problem, destroying archives, destroying books and memories and records, but we also have this as a contemporary issue, both through willful deletion of electronic records and data, and also just through loss, through preservation catastrophes and calamities that happen to digital information. So in our program, we deal with all of this. We talk about creating information, we talk about storing it and managing it, and we talk about digital preservation a lot. But I think what's really interesting about this book as well is that it really puts into perspective why libraries matter. And I'm using libraries as a very general term here, including archives, including lots of different memory organizations. And I'm just going to sort of summarize. I'm not going to read from the book, but in summary, there is a lovely end chapter, which I think is really, really important for anybody going into information studies, talking about why we will always need libraries and archives. They support the education of society. They provide a diversity of knowledge and ideas. They support the well-being of citizens through open access to information. They are a fixed reference point in an era of fake news and false information. Understanding what is actually a fact is an important thing. They have transparency in the way they've been created. There is a story about where material has come from. And they also help societies and cultures to frame their identities. If there is a national library of a culture or a country, it tells you what that country is known for and what its culture is and what its collective memory is. So I think it's a wonderful introduction to the field and why it matters, because quite often when you're an undergraduate and you're plowing through the coursework and the essays and the tutorials, you think, why is this subject important? And it is important to understand that information it surrounds us, and we need to manage it, we need to use it. But we also need to understand why it's at risk. And as information practitioners, we have a vital role to play in negotiating and dealing with that risk.
Without a doubt. And I think nowadays, a lot of us tend to believe we have too much information, or we have access to all the information whenever we want. It's just a click of a button. It's at it's at our fingertips, and that's genuinely not the case. We can communicate with ease. We can put whatever we want out there, but that doesn't mean it's all staying there. And that doesn't mean we always have a way to understand the story. Like you were saying, you were talking about the role of the library or an archive, memory, as a way to get information, as a way to read that story, to see the transparency, and to be able to make an informed opinion about what you are looking at. And that's something that I think is more important now than possibly it ever has been. So hopefully a lot of our students will take a look at that book, because I think there's a lot to learn there. Whether or not they end up going into this degree, I think there's a lot of really important information there. And you had mentioned, Lorna, the idea of the silences, that these silences are important, noticing where they are. And it reminded me a bit of almost detective work. You know, you need to find the silences, be aware of what they could mean, what they're indicating, and work within an archive. I think sometimes in many cases it can be, you know, likened to that idea of almost like the Sherlock Holmes or the investigator going through and looking at different pieces and putting them together in order to come to a conclusion. And I think we see that quite well in the book that you chose for us for book 2, the fiction, which is The Name of the Rose. Could you tell us a little bit more about why, in the end, out of all the possibilities, because I know you were battling with choosing just one, why in the end have you gone with this one?
Well, it's a classic detective novel. It really is. It's a detective novel, but it's also a philosophical novel. It's a book about manuscripts. It's about libraries. It's about memory, and it's about meaning. And you know, all of these things speak to my work, obviously, but it's also just a cracking good story. The film is good as well. The film is okay, and it's got Sean Connery in it, so there's a
And
Scottish
Christian
name.
Slater. Yeah.
Exactly. What more could you want, right? So yeah, I highly recommend the movie. It's really smashing. But it's a great detective novel, but it's also a really important work about semiotics, about meaning, and about understanding the past and understanding the present. I do quite a lot of work in critical heritage, which is sort of understanding the past by the way it's represented in the present. And of course, you know, sort of a 1980s detective novel set in the Middle Ages in a medieval monastery. There's some really interesting sort of narratives there around the way that the past is presented in the present and the way that the story is represented. And of course, it is a fiction. And I actually studied medieval history at Glasgow. That was my first degree. And, you know, we used to have, you know, group readings of this book, finding all the historical inaccuracies in it. And there's not that many, but it's fun to try and spot them. But it's a very good work of historical fiction. And as you know, I really struggled with this because I just could not fix on a fiction book about libraries that would be my favorite, because there's so many. Libraries really resonate in fiction. And I think it's because lots of people use libraries, they work in archives, they like the metaphor of the archive as working through working through collections in order to discover the truth. And that's what happens in The Name of the Rose. The truth is in the manuscript, ultimately, and it's in one manuscript, and no spoilers, but it's but the story relates to the way that the information is managed, and the secret is to do with who holds the manuscripts and who holds the collections and what has happened to those manuscripts as they pass through the monastery and who is holding them. The ending is very ambiguous as well, which I think is nice and interesting, because we never really understand the past and we don't really understand the meaning of manuscripts. I mean, medieval history and manuscript studies and information studies are all about, you know, sort of critical readings, reflections, and understandings of manuscripts, which can be seen in different ways. So it's a really interesting way. It's a really interesting book in terms of that deep and rich engagement with a manuscript. And I think it resonates really well too with my own research, because a couple of years ago, I wrote an article with Andrew Prescott at the National Library of Wales about some manuscripts in the National Library of Wales. And we were talking about digitization of manuscripts, and we're used to mass digitization, you know, sort of Google Books, you know, sort of web searches, you know, finding mass digitized archives in collections around the world. But a lot of those digital images are not very good. They decay very quickly, and it's very difficult to actually really see. You can see some details, but as digitization technology changes so rapidly, what you really want to do is almost a slow digitization, where you do almost a three-dimensional digital analysis of a manuscript, and you understand the way that it's been copied over time. And I'm really interested in the way that quite often people 50, 70 years ago knew manuscripts through their microfilm representation. The manuscripts were microfilmed, and people would go and get microfilm copies of the manuscripts, and that was how they knew manuscripts. Now we know manuscripts through digital imaging, so there's always that sort of question of surrogacy and authenticity in a digital representation. And this is something that really comes out in The Name of the Rose, the question of authenticity and the question of, you know, who has access to a manuscript and what's happened to it over time. So even though it's not a book about digitization, for somebody working in digital humanities, rereading it now, you know, sort of 30 years after I first read it, I do go through it and smile and go, oh yes, you know, I can see how 3D imaging would give a similar result to what the monks were doing here. Or I could see how using RTI imaging approaches in the scriptorium could be applicable to what they're trying to do. And wouldn't it be great to have a database of all of this marginalia so that you could search it really quickly? So I read through the book now through that sort of perspective of digital humanities and digital imaging, and it's a really good book, but it's also just an amazing book to understand the labor that was involved in creating these medieval libraries and medieval manuscripts within those libraries, but the libraries, the cataloguing, the management, the stopping things from eating the books, all of the things that Richard Ovenden talks about, you know, stopping the library being destroyed. It was a monumental effort, and it does make you realize how fragile information is and how fragile information has been in the past. So being able to work in information studies and create access to that information, to sort of support its management and to be part of preventing that fragility from causing loss. I think it's an important thing, and I know everybody says my subject is the most important, you know, history, language, you know, across the humanities we all think our subject is the solution to all the things that are wrong in the world today. But I really do think that information studies is an incredibly important topic right now.
I agree. And I think it's also, you know, you mentioned before, you said who's holding the manuscript, what's happening to the manuscript, who's controlling the manuscript. Because the manuscript was power, because information was power, the same way that information is power today. And with the society that we're living in now, I think it's, again, really important that we have people who want to maintain a world where you can have transparency, who want to maintain a world where you can make an informed opinion, where you can have all the information available before you come to any conclusions. That's really important, because in the same way that in the book, it was very important who was controlling the manuscript. It's really important now in our society, who is controlling our archives, who is making sure that these things are running well, transparently and completely. I think it's a really, really important thing. And thank you very much for what I would consider to be a labor of love, as well as something that you are clearly passionate about. So Lorna, we didn't include it as book 2 in the end, but I know that you do also have a special love towards one of Borges's novellas or longer short stories. If you'd like to just maybe make a few comments about that, it is in the blog for anyone who's interested. We've got a link to a version that you could buy, or a PDF link to a version that you could just read for free online.
I think it would be any of your students or participants watching this who are thinking about a degree in information studies should read that novella. Partly because it's lovely, it's very accessible, it's a thought experiment, it's a very, very interesting piece of work. I love it. But because almost every keynote, every lecture, every introductory presentation in information studies uses it as a metaphor and introduces it as, as Borges said in the Library of Babel. So yes, it's an important book and an important novella, and I think it would be remiss of me not to mention it. I would have chosen it, but somebody else in the series already picked it, so there's already a little account of it, so I direct people to that. But no, it's an important sort of reflection, and again, it's very philosophical. It's about memory, and it's about that relationship between libraries and memories and representation and who has the power in an archive is incredibly important. So yes, I think it bears reading, and it's quite short as well.
It's a good read. It's a good read. So, well, thank you very much for joining us today. I've thoroughly enjoyed our discussion, and I am certain that anyone who picks up these books is going to be very happy that they've decided to go along with your recommendations. So,
well, thank you so much, Allison, for having me, for inviting me to be part of your series. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you very much, Lorna. Have a great day. And
Thanks.
For our Books for Thought viewers, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next time. Bye.